everybody, and welcome to this week's Field Notes. So I've changed the name from Field Notes Friday, even though today is Friday, to Field Notes from the Ranch. It takes a little bit of pressure off me to turn up every Friday, which I really want to do because I like to have a little bit of structure in what is actually an incredibly unstructured life. However, when things don't go according to plan and the way that my brain works, it creates a layer of tension and anxiety that I don't need. So, hence why I'm changing it, because I'm committed to turning up. I'm committed to giving you guys as much as possible within the rewilding circle. But yeah, I'm taking that layer of stress off me. And I hope that is, well, it's got to be okay with you because that's what I'm doing. I am a sweaty mess because I have been spending all morning clearing up certain things after the big storm that we had. So this week we have been talking about fear, and I asked a question about how fear turns up in us and our horses. And I'd like to sort of bring those threads together with some reflections and some thoughts back onto what we have been talking about. I find in my coaching and mentoring that fear is one of those things that people like to hide. They don't like to admit that they're feeling fear. And I think the word fear has so much weight to it, particularly for us as human beings, because it often shows up within our emotions as failure. And when we are looking at our horses and interacting with our horses, we often mislabel it as disobedience or resistance, naughty, bad behavior, etc. But I believe that fear isn't about failure. It is about simply understanding the information that fear is giving you in that moment. It is our nervous system standing up for us. It's speaking out and letting us know that something is requiring our attention, requiring our awareness. So I also mentioned about the three phases of fear, and I just want to recap on that a little bit here also. So I mentioned there's physical fear, which is obviously the obvious one, because we are quite visual beings, and when we see something, we can hold on to it as an understanding easily. And in our horses, we're talking about spooking and jumping, and even the freeze. We see the freeze. And I think that feeling of the freeze and the spooking in us is also incredibly, is one of the things that's at the top of the, on the surface. We can grab it quicker. And like I say, that is our nervous system and our horse's nervous system doing what it's designed to do, which is basically keep us alive, keep us safe, keep our horses safe. Then there is the emotional fear, which is quieter. And it often turns up as hesitation. Those times when our horses don't like to enter a space or cross shadows. And in us, it's that sort of hum of worry. What if I can't handle this? What if I'm not going to be able to manage what is occurring in this dialogue? And it's not so much a panic, but it does stop flow. It stops that flow of energy, the fluidity in our conversations, in our dialogues with ourselves as well as with our horses. And then there's the mental fear. And this is that fear that we attach all our stories to. So My horse is always spooking at that corner, and I'll never get this right. So when we look at our horses and when we're interacting with our horses, we can see patterns. And where there is a brace always at a certain moment, whether that is saddling or, like I say, in a corner of an arena or a shadow or whatever, a refusal to participate, particularly when we can't see that there's anything wrong. But here's the key thing to think about when we are faced with these moments of fear, the faces of fear, and when they're connecting. So if physical fear, like a jolt, if we allow that to seed an emotional worry, that worry can build into a mental story. So you can see how that they're all linked. And once that story is strong enough and becomes habit, becomes a habitual thought process, the body begins to react before the mind. Even there's no when there is even no connection within that conversation, and we don't have time to check in with ourselves to see if it's actually still true. So for our horses, that means fear can outlast the original cause. So unless we allow the experience to resolve, we are going to leave them in that loop of fear. And this takes me back to completing the loop. And this is where curiosity comes in. So you can see that we are building on these conversations because I spoke about curiosity. In fact, I talk about curiosity a lot because it is integral to our horses' stability and balance within the domestic conversations that we're having with them. Horses resolve fear through that curiosity. It builds that confidence. So if we're thinking about a horse spooking, let's say at a plastic bag, because that is something that is very commonly spoken about, allowing them to pause, to sniff, to investigate, to understand, it often creates a moment of calm because they're allowed to walk away with understanding. They're allowed to walk away with a connection to something that created a spook, that created fear, that was able to resolve within that completed dialogue. So the memory completes. But if they rush past it, if they are punished, because I've seen it and we've all seen it, how we get so frustrated with these incomprehensible moments that we end up punishing or even ignoring, then the loop stays open. And that moment becomes stored as unfinished business, which goes back to becoming a story that they rely on as reality. So unfinished memories don't vanish. They resurface, sometimes even months or years later, in a completely different context, but something has been stored, something has been created, a story has been created that they suddenly have to fish out of their memories and use for survival, use to keep safe. And that's often why we say, oh, he spooked out of nowhere, or it was just out of the blue. But really, it isn't, because it's either going to be a memory that has been waiting to resurface because of the lack of resolution, or in any case, there would have been signs building up before that we have missed and we have ignored. So when we meet fear with space and patience, and we allow curiosity to return, and curiosity builds that confidence in horses and in us, we can create a safe space. We can create a calm moment, and we can build a connection of understanding, changing that story that is in our brains or our horse's brains, depending on which side you're looking at it at. So particularly from the human side, all of this conversation really applies also to how we approach circumstances. And when we can catch ourselves in fear, and that first instinct is to mask it or to push on or to get frustrated, or being angry with ourselves and punishing ourselves for not being braver, it only hides what is there for us to see. It is saying to our bodies, to our nervous systems, that we don't trust you. We don't trust ourselves. We don't trust what our body is trying to tell us. But if we can pause, if we can name it and give ourselves a moment, then that softens. That vulnerability becomes a way of communicating and not something to be ashamed of. Communicating with our inner self, and it becomes communication to the moment, to what we are in front of, what we are turning up to. And that courage is beautiful. And somebody shared this week in the circle something that is really key, and I'm going to repeat it here, and I think it's important. Is that the absence of fear? Courage is not the absence of fear, but the ability to move forward in spite of it. The only thing I think I might change there is the in spite of, because that's quite a confronting statement, and maybe reframe that to move forward with it, in conversation with it, in dialogue with it, in collaboration with it. Anyway, that's just my thoughts. So for our horses, courage, when we see our horses brave and take on that courage and work with that fear, work with that story, it looks like investigation, it looks like curiosity, it looks like a desire for understanding and a willingness to collaborate. And like I say, for us, sometimes it's just as simple as naming it, as admitting that in this moment I feel fear, but I will be curious about why that fear has turned up. And it isn't about being clean and perfect and never feeling fear. It's not realistic, and it is not it's not wise to put that pressure on you. Life is messy and real, but we need to be able to show up for ourselves and show up for our nervous systems and understand our nervous systems when those things feel overwhelming. In particular, our gut feelings are important, and we should be listening to them. So one thing I do want to just point out here, though, and again, this came up in a conversation that I was having with a colleague the other evening, and I think it's important also to add it here, that when we talk about horses, we often label them as flight animals that are always ready to flee. And I do say that the question that horses are asking all the time is, am I safe? And that's true, but it's not a case of am I safe with tension and nervousness all the time. I don't see animals living in constant panic. I don't see our horses living in constant panic, but certainly I don't see my horses living in constant panic. They're grazing, they're resting, they're playing. The baseline is calm. So fear isn't their permanent state, but it is a tool that they use when they let go of an environment that feels safe. It is a default when they don't feel safe. And again, I'm going to repeat myself here. We need to be really careful about interrupting any of these conversations that they have or we're having with ourselves, particularly if we are in a coaching moment, because overfacing them and pushing doesn't do anybody any good. Because although you're pushing for an advancement, what you tend to get is a retreat. And that isn't going to be a good state for either of you to be in. It just allows fear to linger longer than nature intended. And nature has an incredible way of bringing these moments to us, to our horses, or within the dialogue that we're having with our horses, and being just the right amount of time to complete that circle. Interrupting it or pushing it and speeding it or slowing it or whatever we're doing with it, allow it to play out. Keeping safe at all times. Remember, you're responsible for your safety. You need to have that also at the forefront of your minds. I think part of our role as human beings and in conversation with our horses is that one of the responsibilities that we have, particularly when we're asking our horses to do something that is at threshold, beyond threshold, in a learning capacity, on that edge of learning and understanding, is to be able to understand how to bring them back to a nervous system baseline of calm. Because if we can stretch that baseline and that threshold in a calm, gentle manner, we get growth. I'd like to leave you with a couple of things with this conversation, and that is, what if fear wasn't something to fix, but something to listen to? And what would change for you and your horse if, instead of overriding that moment, you were able to pause and let curiosity re-emerge? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, and allowing that space. So yeah, I think that sort of wraps that up for today. So thank you for being here, and any comments that you have, any questions that you have, please add them below this video, and I will certainly get back to you with anything that I can help you with. I love turning up here and sharing the thoughts of the week. Excuse me. And so yeah, have an amazing weekend and take care of yourself. Stay curious and finish those loops, and don't allow stories to become things that are not true, that are really not true in your mind. Okay, so yeah, speak to you soon. Take care. Bye for now.